and it is not always it's so familiar that sometimes we don't often pause to take a look at it. So I want to actually look at that very famous passage, the Ve'ahavta, with us this morning. But I'll say Shabbat Shalom and thank you for joining me and everyone, Jefferson and Marty Lip. Shabbat Shalom, welcome. So if you are following in and it's Chaim Chumash, I am on page 1025, 1025. If you are following in a different edition of the Chumash, I am on Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. And if you want to grab a Siddur, just go to whatever page has your Shema and Ve'ahavta on it, so that we can follow. If you are looking at a different translation, there are a couple of things that might be subtly different. And this one I'm actually going to try to offer a translation myself as we go, to look at this just perhaps a moment, perhaps a little bit more deeply than we often do when simply reciting Shema and Ve'ahavta as part of our service. And Shabbat Shalom to Alex as well. So chapter 6, verse 5. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'odecha. V'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavcha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha u'veitecha u'vlechtecha v'derech v'shochvecha u'v'kumecha kshartam leot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot bein einecha uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'visharecha. You will love, this is my translation as I go, and you will love Adonai your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your might. And these words that I command to you today will be on your hearts. And you will repeat them to your children, and you will say them when you are lying down, when you're sitting in your house, when you are going out on the way, when you lie down, and when you get up. And you will bind them as a sign on your hand, and they will be a sign between your eyes. You will write them on the doorposts of your house and of your gate, and on your gates. Such a familiar paragraph, and yet rife with questions, especially in that very first verse. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. You will love Adonai your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your might. This opens an immediate question, two immediate obvious questions to me. One is, how is it that the Torah can command a love of God? How can we be commanded to love? And if we can be commanded to love, what are we supposed to do? How do we actually enact that love? Especially if it is meant to be with our full heart, our full soul, and our full might, all of it, everything. So I want to first offer, and looking at the biblical verses themselves and the biblical language, is that heart, soul, and might may not mean what we today often use those words to mean. Heart in the biblical language actually doesn't always mean the seat of emotion, the way that we tend to think about the word heart today, but actually in the ancient world it often meant the mind. There's an intellectual love. The nefesh is a body, it's an action. And me'od, with our might, is really an emphasis. We should love God in mind and action, in as much of our mind and action as possible. Again, how can that be commanded to love? How can we do it? I think we do ourselves a disservice in the modern world when we act as though love is only an emotion. And we say, well, if I feel it, I don't, if I feel it or don't, is not something I can necessarily control. I think there are two disservices that we tend to do when it comes to especially the word love. One is that we act as though our emotions are not within our control. They may not be fully, but they are at least partially. And I think we do ourselves a disservice if we say that love is simply an emotion. Love is often something that we must actually act out in order to continue to feel it and certainly to show it. Love is something that we do. It's not always something that we feel. It is something that we do, perhaps motivated by a feeling, but it is something that we do. The Sfat Emet, a Hasidic commentator, suggested that every human being has a deep innate sense of wanting to show some kind of love to some kind of power, to the Creator, to offer love to God. And we don't know how to do it necessarily, because often if we let ourselves sit in just emotion, it feels very disconnected. And this is one of the things that I love about Judaism specifically, is that we are not an emotional and faith-based tradition only, but that we have to actually do something to express love. Which then, of course, still leaves the question of, how do I do that? How do I express love to God? Is it a blind following of every commandment? Or is it perhaps something a little bit deeper? And I want to offer an interpretation I learned from Rabbi Noah Farkas, who lives in Encino, California, but he taught it to me at camp one summer, is that it's actually right here in this very paragraph as to how we do this, but it is not, as you might think, in the correct order. We're supposed to go down the list as we did, but then we're supposed to turn around and go back up and think about how it gets deeper and deeper. We're supposed to love our God, Adonai, your God, with all that you are, with all that you have, and to say these words and have them on our hearts. How do we get to that? How do we allow Torah, the words of God, to be on our hearts? We say them to our children repeatedly. Vishinantam is a repetition word. It's a teaching, but by saying things over and over, a constant speech, a constant teaching of words, and we should say them. We should say them when we are sitting down and thinking about anything in our homes. We should be thinking about God and God's tradition in Torah. When we are going out, when we lie down, and when we get up. That's a lot to ask, to constantly have Torah on our minds. And so how do we do it? Let's go to the bottom of the Ve'ahavta. So if you are following in the Etz Chaim Chumash, I'm now going to go backwards from verse 9 back up to verse 5. So if you are looking, we are in page 1026, 1026. Because we should start with Uchtavtam al mezuzot veitecha uvisharecha. Gates is the last word. Gates are outside of our homes even. The first place that we should put a mezuzah, or just some kind of reminder of our tradition, some kind of way to remember that we want to be in a relationship with God and with our tradition, start by putting it in a place that you'll see regularly, that's a part of your community, out at your gate. Put some kind of reminder out at your gate, and then also a little bit closer to you on your very door, on your house. Notice it's around you. Surround yourself with moments to notice God, to notice opportunities for gratitude, to notice Torah. Once it's there and it's familiar and it's around you, move it onto your body. So Rabbi Farkas put it, binding them as a sign on your hands and between your eyes. These are interpreted, this verse is where we receive the interpretation of wearing tefillin, that we may see somewhere on weekdays. Where it's now, we've moved the tradition, it's not just around us, something that we see regularly, but we put it onto us. We put a visible and tangible reminder of our tradition onto our very bodies. Tefillin is one way that we do this, but many of us do this even with jewelry. I wear a chai that my uncle gave to me for my bat mitzvah, but it's also a small reminder. Chai, the word for life, of appreciating life and appreciating the tradition. Put some kind of reminder on ourselves. And then we can go back to verse 7, where we would teach them to our children by repeating. The way to teach is to really learn something, to really know something. How do we learn to know something well enough to teach it? By repeating it, by finding ways to bring it into all of our conversations. Maybe not every conversation we think of as explicitly Jewish, but the way that we think and speak is influenced by our very tradition. When we are sitting in our homes and walking along the way, lying down and getting up, we allow our tradition to infiltrate our lives, be pervasive in how we think and speak, so that it can not only be around us, on our gates or on our house, or on us, on our very bodies, but actually starts to be in our mind as we say and speak and teach. And in order to teach, we have to internalize. The best way to know that you have learned a new subject is that you are able to teach it, that it has become so internalized in you that it is a part of you, and that you are able to teach it to your children. And in that way, that is how these words of Torah ends up on our hearts. And in verse 6, how these words that God has given us, that have offered us so many opportunities to connect and to think and to grow and find opportunities for gratitude and find opportunities for love and find opportunities to care for one another and to be a community. We have done that by putting it around us, on us, in us. And so they are already on our hearts. So if you're having a moment where you're saying, I don't know how I'm supposed to just love God because I'm told to, think about all of the ways that you are surrounding yourself with your tradition, with your teachings, with everything you learn and love, and everything that you can share. And realize that if your tradition is a part of who you are, then you have already fulfilled loving God, loving your tradition, loving your people with all of your heart/mind, all of your soul/body, with all that you have to offer as you allow the tradition to help you be the best version of yourself. I think we all already do this, whether or not we know that we are. So Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much for joining me. And I hope that this helped us maybe see our tradition in a new way and maybe set our own little visual reminders to know that we already do this. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining me here, and I hope to see some of you in the sanctuary in just a little while at 10 a.m. If you are not joining us in person, you can of course still join us on the live stream, beeasy613.org/watch live at 10 o'clock this morning. You will get to join us and see us for our Shabbat morning services. Thank you so much, and thank you, Shabbat Shalom, Jim, thank you for joining us as well. See you soon.